Welcome back, everybody. At long last, I'm returning with another in my series of Gothic book reviews of early Gothic novels, and this one is one that was teased quite a while ago. It is Vathek by William Beckford. And this one is a weird one. We've been through several Gothic novels together if you've been following me on this channel, and this is considered one of the most influential early Gothic novels, but it is really nothing like anything that we've talked about on the channel before. This one threw me for a loop. I picked this book up along with some other books. If you watch that Amazon roulette package video, which pretty much no one did, it has like 2 views. So, but if you did, then you saw that I picked this at random as my next book to read. And it is a strange book. And not in the normal way that the Gothic novels that I've read so far have been strange. It's not about spooky skeletons. There's no spooky skeletons. I don't think there's any skeletons. And there's like no castle. And it's set in the Middle East. And it's about a caliph. And it's based on an actual historical figure. But it's like a fantasy novel. And H.P. Lovecraft really liked it. So let's digest this. But first, I like to talk about the historical context of these books. Well, what do we have with Mr. William Beckford? I did not know really anything about William Beckford going into reading this book until I read the introduction. Then I went online and did some more research, and William Beckford, well, he's reminiscent in a lot of ways of Horace Walpole. You remember Horace Walpole was the writer of the original Gothic novel, Castle of Otranto. So this book is really innovative, just like Castle of Otranto is. It's written very early in his life, just like Castle of Otranto was written very early in his life. This was written when William Beckford was only 24 years old, and he was already extremely rich, just like Horace Walpole was extremely rich, and he was already a member of Parliament. That's right, another MP writing Gothic novels. And also, he had his own mansion that he redid as a Gothic abbey. So it was Fort Hill Mansion and became Fort Hill Abbey. He spent a ton of money on it, just like Horace Walpole did with Strawberry Hill. So there's a lot of crossover between these two guys. It seems to be a very similar story. They both had one massively popular book that kind of outshone everything else in their literary accomplishments. However, Beckford, he's got something else going on, which is a sex scandal. So he, long story short, from what I researched online, he was found in a compromising position with a 13-year-old boy. And that pretty much kind of tanked his political career, and he was hounded by this scandal ever afterward. I'm actually surprised that everything that I've read about him doesn't go more into the problematic nature of the fact that he was possibly having sexual relations with extreme, they said teenager, but he was 13, so that's adolescent. That's just whatever you can say. Oh, about repressed sexualities back then, Oscar Wilde, yeah. But whoa, now we're really going into another pedophilia scandal in Hollywood. Only it wasn't Hollywood; it was the literary world back then. Strangely, William Beckford doesn't seem to get much flack for that. He's not flagged as a problematic author. This is not flagged as some horrible book that people have rallied against. People are starting to rally against H.P. Lovecraft for racism, or some of the other authors, Mark Twain. But the horrible things that Beckford did have apparently not caught anybody's literary criticism yet, probably because nobody cares about novels from the 1700s. So this is from the 1700s. It wasn't published in a final form until 1816, but it was published in the 1880s initially because he wrote this novel in French and simultaneously was having it translated in English by a business associate friend who then jumped the gun and published it early. And then he had to jump the gun and publish his version, and then he continued to make revisions and fought a copyright battle against this other guy. So that whole story was fairly interesting. A lot of interesting subplots with William Beckford. So what the heck is the book even about, and is it even worth reading? One, it's very short, like a lot of the Gothic novels that I've read. Two, it is not like the other Gothic novels that I read in terms of the setting. It's set in the Middle East. It's set in basically what would be modern day Iraq, but 1,000 years ago. So It tells the story of a caliph, a sultan, like named Vathek, and his family. So his mother, and then eventually like his like wife, uh, and his quest for power, knowledge, immortality. So it's kind of like a Faustian tale. He's going to make like a kind of deal with the devil. This devil initially shows up as like this like strange. This strange little man that shows up in his court, and he like kind of offers him like all these like treasures, and then Vathek kind of turns against him and abuses him. And there's a really really weird surreal scene, which is one of the ones that really sticks out to me in the whole book, where they basically start playing soccer with this guy because they're kicking him so hard, and he rolls up into a ball as a defensive mechanism, and then they start kicking him around, and then basically he starts rolling through the streets, and everybody gets in on it, and like all the people in the streets are kicking him like a ball, and he's just like rolling and rolling and rolling until finally like he like rolls off a cliff and like escapes. And that was like so surreal. If you get the sense of that scene, then you'll get a sense of the rest of the book. This book is probably more akin to something like the Arabian Nights than it is something like Castle of Otranto. I do see why it's classified as a Gothic novel. It definitely has that sense of connection to these like deals with the devil type stories. I haven't yet talked about the monk on this channel, but this book reminds me a lot of the monk. It could kind of be like the Muslim monk, because the guy starts out kind of virtuous in that he seems to be a good ruler and he's into like knowledge. His mother, however, the female figure, is a corrupting figure. She is definitely into like black magic, and so they have this tower that's dedicated to the sciences, but also to like magic. And she has these 50 one-eyed negresses, which is what they say in the story, which are like her evil like assistants and follow her around and do like her wicked bidding. And she's constantly like tempting her own son to the dark side, and eventually he wants to make a deal with this like demonic liaison, and horrible things ensue. But it's also surreal. So like sometimes it really seems like really dark, like there's like these like evil black magic rituals, and they're like basically going on a quest to find hell, but they think like that this devil is going to like give them powers and things. And then other times it's like really surreal and comical, like it's so overdone, like the 50 one-eyed women are doing all these weird things, and like they're kicking a man around like he's a soccer ball, and all these weird kind of surreal things happen. So the tone of the book, it's really uneven. The characters are not as multidimensional as something like Anne Radcliffe. Like the books that I've read of hers probably have the most multidimensional characters in Gothic literature. These characters, while they do evolve over time, kind of like the mom is like evil in the beginning and she's evil at the end. Vathek himself is like slowly corrupted over time, but like the other guy, like the Gower, he's just demonic, and like the woman that Vathek finally falls for, she seems to just like go to the dark side almost immediately too. She's like, oh yes, this will be great. Like if we go find these halls of Elbis, which is basically like this demonic realm that they're looking to enter in the ruins under this city, they go on this like pilgrimage for. And the last part of the book, which is their actual like descent into this hell, I won't like give any spoilers, but it was like the darkest part of the book. So if you do decide to read this, you know, a lot of the like dark, horrible imagery that you'll hear described, it's all kind of at the end. Like this is a book that's like taking a descent, and you really got to follow it to really get the payoff at the end. And there was quite a good payoff. I've got to say that the end was probably my favorite part of the book, other than the weird human soccer ball part. I really liked that for some reason. I liked the imagery of this guy defensively rolled up in a ball, and like the whole town is just kicking him down the street. I thought that was cool. So this book was really well researched to some degree. William Beckford and his editor were both kind of Orientalists. They were people who were really taken by stories of the East and were translating different documents and things. They were really into the Arabian Nights stories and all these Eastern kind of folklore stories. And they were learning a lot about Islam. Some of the things that he has in here is misinformation, though. So it's weird because he actually was a scholar of Islam, and there's footnotes in the book that tie in all these historical facts, even though the book itself is like a fantasy novel with a horrific ending, essentially. And I didn't really know how to take that, because it was actually the footnotes to the books and the research that him and his editor were fighting over extensively. And that means that he took it very seriously and very personal, that these footnotes were basically a major source of the literary quality of his book. And regardless of what's going on in his personal lives, it's kind of strange to see a book where the artistic vision is in part like centered on this real life research, but he also has completely non-factual things in there, and yet he takes it so seriously to basically get into this huge literary feud with his editor over how the book and how the footnotes and how the research is going to be portrayed as part of the literary process of writing this novel. And like I said, he didn't really come up with a clean, finished version of the book until like 1816. He was continuously making revisions, and he actually, I don't think, lived too much longer than that. I think he died in the 1820s. Did this book have much of an influence on the rest of the Gothic? Like I said, it's more akin to something like Faust, something like The Monk. It's about the downfall of a person. It's about the demonic influences. It's about kind of like the great man falling. And that's not a theme that the other Gothic novels of the early days shared, but I think it's a theme that was like coming up in future Gothic novels, future from the 1700s into the 1800s, more things along the lines of Frankenstein, Melmoth the Wanderer. So it's kind of like a new beginning for a new type, new direction of Gothic story, kind of this like Faustian, great man falling, temptations by demons, rather than like the lineage storylines and the like weird parallel storylines of like the early Gothic tales of the castle and the spooky ghosts. The setting is definitely a huge factor in this book. I never really thought of setting like a Gothic novel in the Middle East, nor would I have thought that like one of the earliest Gothic novels and most influential Gothic novels would have been set in the Middle East. They're all supposed to be set in like Spain and Italy. And here's the thing, of like the ones that we've covered so far, Castle of Otranto is in Italy, yes. But then the castles of Athlone and Dunbayne is in Scotland, and the Old English Baron is in England, and Vathek is in Iraq. So it really is a lot more geographically spread out as far as the locations of these stories in the early days than like what the stereotype is later, that they're all set in like Italy or Spain. So we really haven't seen that trend so far. Should you read Vathek? Well, once again, I got the Oxford World Press edition, Oxford World Classics from Oxford University Press edition. It's really short. It's probably the shortest of all the Gothic novels that I've read so far. It does have like some good notes on the text and how this is kind of a as closer to a definitive edition of the text as you can get. And it was a quick read. It was a fun read. If you don't want to support like an author that did like horrible pedo things, then I guess you could skip it. But he has been dead for 200 years, so he's not going to benefit too much from that. And I don't have a thing where it's like problematic authors like can't read this because it's by a problematic author. Like I literally read Hitler's book, so like, you know, who could be more problematic than that guy? I read a book like as a literary source because this was an important literary piece. It's totally separate from who he is as an individual, especially since he's dead and not going to profit from the book. I can definitely understand more along the lines of if you have a problem with an author for certain reasons, and the author is alive and profiting off the book, that you would not want to purchase the book. But in this case, you know, the guy's been safely dead for 2 centuries. The other thing is that there is like a sequel to this book called The Episodes of Vathek. So when they're in the halls of Elbis, which is like this other dimension hell place, there are people that they meet that are kind of also cursed souls that are there that then tell their stories. And he spent years like editing this as well, and maybe at one point was going to come up with a version where it was intermingled. So the end of the book might actually have had these other stories of other people who were in the halls of Elbis. I think there's 3 that I think are finished, and I think that he had in mind like a 4th one. And there is an edition that's being published now that has the tales of Vathek, or they're called the Episodes of Vathek. And I wish I'd known that, because as much as I love Oxford Unity Press, I think that they dropped the ball by not including them, especially because this is so short. Like, even with the introduction and the footnotes and everything, it's like 140 pages. So you definitely could have stuck those episodes of Vathek, which I don't think are very long, in here. So I actually intend to get another copy of this book. I'm going to get another copy, maybe not this year, but maybe next year. Maybe when I've gone through some more of the early Gothic novels and want to like retrace and go back to Vathek and say, was there anything in those episodes of Vathek that was worthwhile? Because the episodes, I think they were still unfinished when he died. He never completed like an integrated version of the book. And those episodes of Vathek, I think, weren't published till the 20th century. When literary interest in Beckford maybe like went up a little bit. So I would really like to read those episodes of Vathek because this was a kind of cool adventure story, and it was definitely like weird. It's worth reading just because of how weird it is. And one final note, this is becoming a long review, but one final note is that this book was absolutely beloved by H.P. Lovecraft, who is my favorite author. So Lovecraft really was into this story. He put it like above the works of like Horace Walpole, or he actually talks quite a bit about Shelley's two Gothic novels, and also Anne Radcliffe. He's like, yeah, that stuff, that was all, you know. But Vathek, that was great because it was so weird and so otherworldly and so more like a weird tale that he would say, rather than he wasn't as much into, you know, sadly, the spooky castles and the spooky skeletons. Because, you know, that's what we're all about here. We're all about the spooky skeletons. But we also love H.P. Lovecraft. So I could definitely see when I was reading this, I could sense Lovecraft reading it, and I could sense Lovecraft loving it. And I've been reading some short stories inspired by Lovecraft right now for like Halloween time. That's kind of like my non-Victober reading right now. And as I was reading those, I was kind of getting in Lovecraft's mindset and just thinking like, back to Vathek, I was like, yeah, I could totally see he would be a sucker for this because he was critical of it. He was critical of the uneven tone. But in his book on supernatural and weird fiction, he really loved this book. He spends quite a dedication, or dedicates quite a bit of space to talking about how this was a great book. And its blend of fantasy and horror, I could definitely see appealing to him. He had even read the episodes of Vathek, so they must have been published very early in the 20th century because, you know, Lovecraft died very young, and he, you know, died before World War II. So it must have been in the early part of the 19th century, or the early part of the 20th century, that these were published. So Vathek, I actually recommend reading if you're into like weird Arabian tales, fantasy, horror, and it's very short and it's fun and it's very weird and surreal. And so if you're into that kind of thing, it is a fun tale to read. There's all kinds of bizarre things that happen and that I'm not going to get into in this review, but I do recommend it. I've got some more reviews coming up, as long as I've still got some natural light to shoot on, because like I said, I've kind of given up on my halo light here. It's just not working out for me. So I'm going to try and film one more review while I've still got some natural light, and it's going to be the other book that lost the competition in the Amazon roulette. So thanks for watching this, guys. I've got several more reviews of Gothic novels coming up. Like, subscribe if you made it all the way through this. Like, God bless you. You might as well subscribe to the channel, because if you can put up with listening to me for 19 minutes, you might as well subscribe. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.